So one of the things I like to do in my professional life is educate, and I've embraced that with what I do as a doctor. But I wanted to do the same kind of concept when it came to fig biology and growing and propagation and enjoying fruit. So I'm going to kind of take you through what I consider to be the basics of fig terminology and physiology and biology, and just give everyone kind of a base understanding because I think this would have been helpful when I first started doing stuff. So, what we're going to go over is different fig terminology, and then biology, and then fruit production. I'm kidding. That's a doctor joke. That's hopefully not what I'm going to write with. So first thing we're going to talk about, and I apologize for my artwork, is the difference between a flower and a fig. So a flower, you have the petals that go out, and then you have the sex organs here that require pollination, and that's your flower. All right. A fig is a flower, but it is inverted, and so happy Valentine's Day tomorrow. This is an ostiole. This is the eye of the fig, but the fig itself grows in on itself. And so sometimes you have a hollow cavity, sometimes it's all filled, but the sex organs are in the inside here. The reason the ostiole, and we'll go over that term later, is important is that it's important for fig wasp entrance, if the fig wasp is going to be pollinating the fig, or it can affect spoilage of figs if it is an open ostiole and you're in a humid or wet environment. So we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of pairs of terms. And these terms, again, this is nerd biology, but it's nice to know them. The first one is a term called Parthenocarpic, and that does not need pollination. That is a fig that does not require artificial pollination by either your hand, if you're hand pollinating, or the fig wasp. The opposite of that is a fig that is caducous, and this does need pollination. So that's the first distinction. The second two terms we're going to talk about throughout this little video is uniferous, which is one crop for the fig tree, versus biferous. And biferous is two crops. In fact, some fig trees will give you three crops in ideal situations. And then the last one, this is one you're going to come across the most, is the distinction between Breba and main crop figs. So a Breba will grow on last year's wood, and a main crop will grow on this year's wood. All right, so these are the definitions we're going to use when we go over to the next part of this this fig biology little lecture. Male figs versus female figs. Now, for the most part, the figs you are eating and enjoying are female figs. Male figs are called capra figs. Technically, they can have three crops. The spring crop, or the prophyci crop, that's the one most people care about because that is the source of pollen. So fig wasp comes here, or you are growing these and you're harvesting the pollen, go up into the ostiole, into the fig. So that's how figs are pollinated. So let's talk about female figs. There's a couple of distinctions here, different categories. First category, and this is called a Smyrna fig, and the Smyrna fig is a caducous fig, which tells you it needs to be pollinated. It only gives you main crop. All right, so that's what a Smyrna fig is. The next category is the San Pedro class. The San Pedro class will give you Breba. So that is fruit on last year's wood. These Breba crop are Parthenocarpic, which means they don't need to be pollinated. Then there's main crop. And the main crop in a San Pedro fig are caducous, which means needs pollination. And so technically, San Pedro figs are biferous, whereas a Smyrna fig is uniferous. The last distinction is common. And a common will give you, can be one of two things. Can be uniferous, so main crop only, or biferous, and that can give you Breba plus main. All of these are parthenocarpic. So common figs can grow in areas where there is no fig wasp. So let's look at the fig wasp. And the fig wasp has a name called Blastophaga senis. And it's super tiny. And here's the map in California where you can see the fig wasp. And this is, various areas of California, but really nowhere else in the United States naturally do they occur. I know people have tried introducing them in Texas and in Florida, but they didn't really hold. This is a picture of what that fig wasp looks like. So it's super tiny, and so that is that's what the fig wasp is. And so the fig wasp is needed for the Smyrna fig, for the main crop of the San Pedro fig. Those are the requirements. Now, I live in Oregon, where I grow a lot of San Pedros. The Desert King, the most well-known of these. I've had a 20 or 25-year-old tree in my yard. It gives a tremendous amount of Breba. For years, the main would form and never ripen, except for this last year. I got 30 to 40 delicious main crop in an area in Oregon in Zone 9A where I don't have the fig wasp. So how does that happen? I don't know. Numerous people in my community also reported it. So for the common figs, even though they don't require the fig wasp or pollination, if you have the same tree in Oregon versus in Central California, and the Central California tree is getting caprified by the fig wasp, they'll taste better, typically. And that's been my experience when I've tasted figs that have been caprified or have not. Just because, so that's just something to understand, that this is like the general overview of when it comes to figs. So the last couple of things that we need to go over is the distinction of terms when it comes to growing figs, so or harvesting the fruit. So more terms. So the ostiole is the eye of the fig that I showed you before. That's where the fig wasp enters and exits. And the important part when it comes to fig harvest is, if you don't know the characteristics of your fig, and it is a tendency to be an open eye fig, and you live in a wet, humid environment, that fig is going to be more prone to either spoilage from humidity or moisture, or pests, ants, or whatever it may be. Whereas figs that are very tight eye tend to resist those problems. So the next thing we're going to talk about are the actual cuttings, 6, 8, 10-inch cuttings. And the term you're going to see a lot is node. And so if you look at this picture, the nodes are these little areas that jut out from the actual cutting itself. So why are the nodes important? Well, the nodes turn into different things. It can turn into a fig. It can be where a leaf is. It can be where a new branch forms, or it can be where the roots come out. And that's important because if you're trying to propagate figs, you need to make sure you have sufficient nodes to bury some, to root them, and to keep some not buried, to result in the actual superstructure of the fig tree itself. And then the last term I want to go over is the actual wood itself. And again, fig cuttings, these are scion, these are clones. And so the cutting, if you grow it, is genetically identical to the parent tree, like apple trees. All right. Whereas if you wanted a new variety of a fig, you'd have to mess with growing from seed and pollinating, and that's a whole world that I don't want to join. Then when it comes to scion wood of the different cuttings, you have fresh or green, versus a term you're going to see all the time, which is lignified. So fresh and green, obviously, this is new growth. Lignified is hardened off brown. You can see the difference here. The first picture, this is a green cutting, a fresh, fresh cutting, and then the second one, this one is lignified. And the reason the lignified ones are important is because lignification, in my experience, when it comes to propagating, those cuttings are more successful, and that is that's important to understand when it comes to spoilage and rotting. The green ones will rot faster than the lignified ones, but when it comes to the physiology and health of the actual plant outside, whether it's in a pot or in the ground, lignified trees are more resistant to extreme cold weather. And so I grew a lot of new trees last year. They were still green in October, November. I elected not to plant any of those in the ground because I was worried that they would die off because of freezing temperatures. Whereas I had 5 or 6 older trees that I did put in the ground, and I just went out and saw them after several different freezing spells here in Oregon in Zone 9A, and they're doing just fine. So it's important that you understand these terms as well. So this is a broad overview. Again, I'm only a couple of years into this, but I try to read as much as I can. I like to approach this scientifically. Certainly, I'm sure there are people out there who are watching this who are either rolling their eyes or saying, no, that's not accurate. And if that's the case, please leave a comment below, because this is how I learn. This is part of my process and my journey with understanding figs. But there are many, many websites out there that will give you a ton of information. Figlife.com or many of the popular bloggers will give you some information as well. Again, you always have to wonder about their scientific background, but we are all becoming experts in this as we learn and read more. So I encourage you to do the same thing: explore, experiment, do different things when it comes to your conditions that you're growing under, when you're harvesting, and just put your experience out there and put your observations out there, because as a community, that's how we learn. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, leave them down below, and I hope to make more of these videos over time. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.